They said a woman who spoke against a duke would be destroyed by morning. Adrienne Hale didn't just speak, she roared. In a ballroom full of cowards, she called out the most powerful man in the North for the blood on his hands. The room went silent. His eyes went cold, and her life would never be the same. What happens when courage meets cruelty? When a merchant's daughter with nothing but her voice goes head-to-head with an industrial giant who could erase her family with a signature? Stick around to the end of this story. You won't believe how far she's willing to go or what she discovers about the man she thought she knew. Drop a like, tell us what city you're watching from, and let's dive into a tale of defiance, danger, and destiny. The Ashford Winter Charity Gala wasn't just an event. It was a declaration of dominance. Every year, the elite of the Northern Industrial Territories gathered in Duke Victor Ashford's sprawling estate to see and be seen, to forge alliances over champagne, to whisper deals that would reshape entire economies. The grand ballroom glittered like a jewelry box, all crystal chandeliers and marble floors polished to mirrors. Women wore gowns that cost more than most families earned in a year. Men wore power like cologne, and Adrienne Hale wore fury. She stood near the edge of the dance floor, her emerald dress simple compared to the explosion of silk and diamonds around her, but her spine was straight as steel. Her father, Edmund Hale, shifted uncomfortably beside her, his merchant's instinct screaming at him to blend in, to smile, to not make waves. But Adrienne's jaw was set, her dark eyes fixed on the man holding court in the center of the room. Duke Victor Ashford, tall, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed in black and silver. His dark hair was swept back from a face that could have been carved from granite. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, eyes the color of winter steel. When he spoke, people leaned in. When he moved, the crowd parted. He didn't ask for respect, he commanded it, and Adrienne hated him for it. "Don't," her father murmured, reading her expression like a ledger he'd memorized. "Whatever you're thinking, don't." "I'm thinking he needs to hear the truth for once in his privileged life," Adrienne said quietly. Edmund grabbed her wrist, gentle but firm. "The truth doesn't pay our debts, Audrey. It doesn't keep our shipping contracts or our warehouse lease. Men like Ashford, they don't hear truth. They hear challenge, and they crush challenges." She looked at him, this man who'd taught her numbers and negotiation, who'd raised her to think and question and never bow to anyone. But somewhere along the way, he'd learned to bow. To survive, maybe, but still. "Then maybe it's time someone made him listen," she said. The moment came like fate dressed up as coincidence. The Duke was speaking with a cluster of admirers, other industrialists, minor nobles, a banker or two, when someone mentioned the new railway expansion into the northern mining territories. Pride colored his voice as he described the project. "The Thornmere line will triple our coal output within 2 years," he said, accepting a glass of wine from a passing server without even looking. "We're already negotiating contracts with the southern manufacturers. It's a triumph of modern engineering." "And modern cruelty," Adrienne said. She didn't shout it, didn't need to. Her voice cut through the conversation like a blade through silk, and the entire cluster went quiet. Heads turned, conversations nearby faltered and died. The Duke's eyes found hers, cold, assessing. "I beg your pardon?" Her father's hand tightened on her arm. She pulled free. "The Thornmere mines," she said, stepping closer. The crowd opened around her like a wound. "Your triumph of modern engineering. Workers dying in cave-ins because you won't reinforce the tunnels. Children, actual children, hauling coal 14 hours a day for wages that won't feed a family. That's what your railway expansion is built on." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Someone gasped. An older woman clutched her pearls like they might protect her from the scandal. A man in military dress blues muttered something about inappropriate and unseemly, but the Duke just looked at her, really looked. His expression hadn't changed, still that same cool, aristocratic mask. But something flickered behind his eyes. Surprise? Anger? She couldn't tell. "Miss Hale. Adrienne Hale. Miss Hale." He said her name like he was filing it away for later. "You seem to have very strong opinions about matters you clearly don't understand." "I understand numbers," she shot back. "My family deals in trade. We see the shipments from your mines. We see the accident reports that never make the newspapers. We see the families coming south looking for work because their fathers and brothers died in your tunnels. So forgive me if I understand exactly what your triumph costs. Adrienne, her father hissed behind her. She ignored him. The Duke stepped closer. He was taller than she'd expected, and standing this close, she could see the calculation in his gaze. Not fury, not embarrassment, but something sharper. He was measuring her, deciding. The mining industry is dangerous, he said, his voice even, reasonable, which somehow made it worse. Accidents happen. We implement safety measures within the constraints of profitability. Without profit, there are no mines. Without mines, there are no jobs. Perhaps you'd prefer everyone starve equally? I'd prefer you value human life over quarterly earnings. And I'd prefer naive idealists didn't lecture me on industries they've never set foot in. His tone hadn't risen, but it had hardened. Tell me, Miss Hale, how many mines have you operated? How many workers have you employed? How many market fluctuations have you navigated while keeping an entire region's economy afloat? How many funerals have you attended? She countered. How many widows have looked you in the eye while you explained that their husband's death was an acceptable cost of doing business? The crowd had grown. People were watching now, drawn by the spectacle like moths to flame. This kind of confrontation didn't happen at Ashford events. Nobody challenged the Duke. Not publicly, not ever. A woman in diamonds whispered to her companion, loud enough to carry, "Who does she think she is?" "A fool," someone else answered. The Duke's jaw tightened. Just a fraction, just for a moment, but Adrian saw it. She'd gotten under his skin. "You're young," he said, and now there was an edge to his voice. Young and passionate and utterly ignorant of how the world actually works. "I'd suggest you learn your place before you embarrass your family further." My place? Heat flooded her cheeks. My place is wherever I choose to stand. And right now, I'm standing here telling you that your empire is built on bones, and history will remember you as a man who valued gold over humanity. "Enough," her father said, suddenly between them, his face pale. "Your Grace, please forgive my daughter. She's overwrought. The journey, the excitement of the evening." "Don't apologize for me," Adrienne snapped. "She's right, Edmund." The Duke's eyes never left Adrienne's face. "Don't apologize. Let her own her convictions. Let her stand in her place." He smiled, thin and cold. "I'm sure she'll find it very educational." The threat was clear, not shouted, not explicit, but there in the way he said it, in the way he looked at her father, and then back at her. This wasn't over. This was just beginning. "We're leaving," Edmund said, gripping Adrienne's elbow hard enough to hurt. "Good idea," the Duke said pleasantly. "Do enjoy the rest of your evening." The walk to the exit felt like a mile. Every eye in the ballroom tracked them. Whispers followed in their wake, a rising tide of scandal and speculation. Adrienne kept her chin up, her steps steady, but her heart hammered against her ribs. What had she done? Outside, the winter air hit like a slap. Her father didn't speak until they were in the carriage. The door closed, the driver snapping the reins. Then he turned on her. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" "I told the truth." "You humiliated one of the most powerful men in the North in front of his peers." Edmund's voice cracked. "You made an enemy, Adrienne. Not just any enemy, the Duke of Ashford. Do you understand what that means?" "It means someone finally had the spine to call him out. It means we're finished." He pressed his hands to his face. "Our contracts, our reputation, our business, everything we've built, gone. Because you couldn't keep your mouth shut." Guilt twisted in her stomach, but she pushed it down. "So we just let men like him do whatever they want? We smile and bow and pretend the suffering doesn't exist?" "We survive, Adrienne. That's what we do. We're not nobles. We don't have estates and titles and generational wealth to fall back on. We have our wits and our work, and you just threw both away for what? A moment of righteous fury?" She looked out the window at the dark countryside rolling past. Maybe some things are worth more than survival. Her father didn't answer. The silence between them felt like a wall. By morning, the damage was clear. 3 of their biggest contracts canceled. Not officially, not yet, but Edmund received polite letters explaining that due to unforeseen circumstances and shifting priorities, their services would no longer be required. The warehouse lease they'd been negotiating suddenly awarded to a competitor, the bank loan they needed to expand their southern routes, denied without explanation. The Duke's hand was invisible but everywhere. Adrienne watched her father age 10 years in 3 days. He stopped sleeping, stopped eating properly, just sat in his study, going over ledgers, trying to find a way through the maze of financial ruin closing around them. "I'm sorry," she told him one evening. He looked up, eyes hollow. "Are you?" "For hurting you, for hurting our family, but not for what I said." He needed to hear it. "And now we need to live with the consequences." He set down his pen. "I've made arrangements. You're going to stay with your aunt in Millhaven for a while." "What?" "No, I'm not running." "You're not running. You're surviving." His voice was flat, dead. "Your presence here makes things worse. Every business associate who sees you remembers the scandal. Every potential client wonders if we're troublemakers. You need to go. Let things cool down. Let me try to salvage what's left." "Father, please." The word cracked. "Please, Adrienne, I can't fix this with you here." So she went. Millhaven was a port city 3 days south, all salt air and seabirds and merchant ships crowding the harbor. Her Aunt Clara ran a modest boarding house near the docks, catering to sailors and traders passing through. It wasn't grand, wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and Clara was kind enough not to ask too many questions. For 2 weeks, Adrienne helped with the house, changed linens, served meals, tried not to think about her father drowning in debt because she couldn't keep her mouth shut. But guilt is a poor companion, and anger is a terrible lullaby. She was in the market one afternoon buying vegetables for dinner when she heard the conversation. 2 men, dock workers by the look of them, talking over pints of cheap beer. "Whole section collapsed. Heard it was near 20 men trapped." "Thornmere mine?" "Aye. 3rd accident this month. Boss says they're pushing too hard trying to meet the new railway quotas." Adrienne's hands tightened on the basket. "Anyone get out?" "Few. Most didn't. Families won't see a penny neither. Duke's people say it was worker error. Always is, innit?" She left the basket on the counter and walked straight to the harbormaster's office. The harbormaster was a grizzled old sailor named Brennan, who knew everyone and everything that moved through Millhaven. He looked up when Adrienne entered, one eyebrow rising. "Miss Hale, what brings you to my humble corner of chaos?" "I need information," she said, "about the Thornmere mines, about Ashford Industries, everything you know." Brennan leaned back in his chair, studying her. "That's a dangerous topic for a young woman to be poking around in." "I'm not afraid of danger." "Maybe you should be." But he pulled out a worn ledger anyway. "What specifically do you want to know?" "Accident reports, worker complaints, anything that proves the Duke knows about the conditions and ignores them." "Ah." Brennan's expression shifted. "You're trying to build a case." "I'm trying to find the truth." "Same thing, sometimes." He flipped through pages. "I know some people, dock workers who used to be miners, sailors who haul coal shipments and hear things. There's talk, Miss Hale. Lots of talk. But talk doesn't change anything. Men like Ashford, they're untouchable. Nobody's untouchable." "Tell that to the families burying their dead." She met his eyes. "That's exactly what I intend to do." Brennan studied her for a long moment, then he sighed. "You got your father's stubbornness and your mother's fire. Dangerous combination." He tore a page from his ledger and scribbled an address. "Go here. Ask for Marcus Webb. He used to be a foreman at Thornmere before he got smart and left. If anyone can give you real information, it's him." Adrienne took the paper. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. You're walking into a fight you can't win." "Maybe," she said, "but at least I'll be walking." Marcus Webb lived in a cramped apartment above a fish shop. He was in his 40s, weathered and wary, with the kind of tired eyes that had seen too much and slept too little. When Adrienne explained why she'd come, he laughed. "You want to take down the Duke? Good luck, girl. Men have tried. Men with more money and power than you'll ever see. They're all gone now." "I'm not trying to take him down," Adrienne said. "I'm trying to expose the truth. Let the public decide. The public doesn't care. They want their coal cheap and their factories running. They don't want to know what it costs. Then I'll make them care. Webb shook his head, but he pulled out a box from under his bed. Inside were papers, accident reports, letters, testimonies from workers, years of documentation. I kept these, he said quietly, thought maybe someday someone would listen, but nobody ever does. I'm listening now. He looked at her, really looked. You know what you're risking? Your reputation, your family, maybe your life. Ashford doesn't play games, he destroys people. Then he and I have something in common, Adrian said. She spent 3 days going through Webb's papers, copying everything, organizing it into a coherent narrative of neglect and greed. The evidence was damning. Repeated safety violations, ignored worker complaints, accident reports altered to shift blame, all of it pointing back to decisions made at the highest levels of Ashford Industries, with the Duke's personal seal on half the documents. Armed with proof, Adrienne did something bold. She wrote an article, not for a major newspaper, they'd never print it, but for small independent presses, workers' newsletters, reform pamphlets. She laid out the facts in clear, undeniable language. She named names, she cited sources, and she signed it with her own name. Within a week, copies were circulating through Mill Haven. Within 2, they'd spread to other port cities. Workers read it. Reformers read it. People started asking questions. And in his estate up north, Duke Victor Ashford read it too. She was in her aunt's kitchen when the letter arrived. Official Ashford Industries stationery. Her name in sharp, precise handwriting. Her aunt watched nervously as Adrienne opened it. Inside, just 3 lines. Miss Hale, you wanted my attention. You have it. V.R.A. Her hands didn't shake, but her pulse quickened. What does it say? Claire asked. Adrienne folded the letter carefully. It says I was right. He does know who I am. Adrienne, this isn't a game. I know. She met her aunt's worried gaze. It never was. That night, she couldn't sleep. She stood at the window of her small room, looking out at the dark harbor, the ships rocking gently on the tide. Somewhere out there, the Duke was planning his next move. Somewhere out there, miners were descending into dangerous tunnels for wages that wouldn't feed their families. And somewhere inside herself, in a place beyond fear or doubt, Adrienne Hale was preparing for war. Because she'd learned something in the weeks since that ballroom confrontation. She'd learned that power wasn't just about money or titles or estates. Power was also about conviction, about refusing to be silent, about standing in the fire and not backing down. The Duke had wealth and influence, but Adrienne had something he'd forgotten people could have. She had nothing left to lose, and that made her more dangerous than he could possibly imagine. The game had begun. The pieces were moving, and neither of them had any idea how it would end. The first sign of retaliation came 3 days after the letter. Adrienne was walking back from the market, her mind churning through possibilities for the next article, when she noticed the man following her. He wasn't subtle about it, didn't need to be. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in the kind of plain clothes that screamed hired muscle. He kept a half-block distance, matching her pace exactly. She turned down a side street. He followed. Her heart kicked up, but she kept walking, steady, calm. When she reached her aunt's boarding house, she climbed the steps without looking back and locked the door behind her. Claire was in the parlor, mending a torn curtain. She looked up, saw Adrienne's face, and set down her needle. What happened? Someone's watching the house. Her aunt went to the window, careful not to move the curtain too much. The man in the gray coat? You've seen him before? He showed up yesterday morning, just stands there, watching. Claire's hands twisted in her apron. Adrienne, what have you gotten yourself into? Nothing I can't handle. That's not an answer. Adrienne moved to the kitchen, pouring herself water she didn't want just to have something to do with her hands. The Duke is trying to intimidate me, make me nervous, make me stop. Maybe you should stop. I can't. Can't or won't. Adrienne turned. Does it matter? Clara crossed her arms, her expression hard. Your father wrote to me. Did you know that? He's desperate, Audrey. The business is failing. He's selling assets just to stay afloat. And you're here, poking a bear that could destroy what's left of your family with a word. The guilt was a knife between her ribs. I know. Then why? Because if I stop, nothing changes. The miners keep dying, the families keep suffering, and men like Ashford keep pretending their hands are clean. She set down the glass. I can't live with that silence anymore. But you can live with ruining your father? The words hit like a slap. Adrienne flinched. That's not fair. Fair, Claire's voice rose. Fair is what you think you're fighting for, isn't it? Justice and truth and all those pretty words. But fair doesn't pay debts. Fair doesn't keep roofs over heads. And fair certainly doesn't protect young women who make enemies of powerful men. I'm not asking you to understand. Good, because I don't. Clara grabbed her mending and headed for the stairs. But you're still my niece, so I'll keep my mouth shut and my doors locked. Just don't expect me to celebrate when this all comes crashing down. Adrienne stood alone in the kitchen, the weight of everything pressing down like a physical thing. Her father's business, her aunt's fear, the man watching the house, the Duke's cold fury waiting somewhere in the north. She'd started this. There was no going back. The second article hit the streets 2 days later. This one was sharper, more specific. She detailed the Thornmere collapse that had sparked her initial investigation. 23 men dead, 17 families left without providers, and not a single copper from Ashford Industries in compensation. She quoted directly from internal documents that showed the Duke himself had denied funding for tunnel reinforcements 3 months before the collapse. His signature was on the denial, black ink on white paper. Undeniable. The response was immediate. Workers in 3 cities organized protests. Small ones, nothing that would shut down operations, but visible, angry. Reformist newspapers picked up the story. Questions were raised in merchant councils and trade guilds. People started asking why a man with Ashford's wealth couldn't afford to keep his workers alive. And the Duke's retaliation escalated. The man watching the house was joined by another. Then another. Adrienne couldn't step outside without feeling eyes on her. Letters arrived at the boarding house, anonymous, threatening. One contained a detailed list of her daily movements. Another had a single sentence, accidents happen to troublesome women. Clara stopped speaking to her entirely. Her father's letters became desperate. Please, Adrienne, stop this madness before there's nothing left to save. But she couldn't stop. Because along with the threats came something else. Letters from workers, widows, men who'd lost brothers and sons. They thanked her, called her brave, told her to keep fighting. One letter from a woman named Sarah whose husband had died at Thornmere ended with a single line. You're the first person who's treated us like we matter. Adrienne kept that letter in her pocket, touched it when the fear got too loud. She was reading through new documents Marcus Webb had sent when someone knocked on her door. Heavy, authoritative. Not the kind of knock you ignored. She opened it to find a man in an expensive coat, his face weathered but sharp. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Miss Hale, my name is Gregory Thornton. I wonder if we might talk. Every instinct screamed danger. About what? A mutual interest in reforming certain industrial practices. May I come in? She should have said no, should have slammed the door. But something in his directness, in the way he met her eyes without the usual masculine condescension, made her hesitate. The parlor, she said, and the door stays open. Thornton settled into a chair like a man used to being in charge. Adrienne sat across from him, spine straight, hands folded, waiting. You've made quite a stir, he said. That was the point. The Duke of Ashford is not a man who appreciates being publicly humiliated. The Duke of Ashford is not a man who should be allowed to operate without accountability. Thornton's smile widened slightly. I like you, Miss Hale. You have steel. That's rare. He leaned forward. I'm going to be direct because I think you value directness. I want Victor Ashford's empire broken. You want justice for his workers. Our goals align. Who are you? An industrialist, like Ashford. We've been competitors for years. Steel, coal, shipping. We operate in many of the same markets. He paused. The difference is, I believe progress and profit don't require corpses. How noble. I'm not noble, Miss Hale. I'm pragmatic. Ashford's methods are medieval. They give all of us a bad name. And more importantly, they're vulnerable. Adrian studied him. What do you want? To help you. You have passion and evidence. I have resources and reach. Together we could force real change. Public inquiries, government oversight, maybe even criminal charges if we play it right. In exchange for what? In exchange for Ashford losing market share that I intend to claim. He didn't even pretend otherwise. I'm not a saint. I'm a businessman who sees an opportunity. But unlike Ashford, I'm willing to implement real safety standards, fair wages, proper compensation for families. You'd be trading one industrialist for a better one. It was manipulation, clear as glass, but it was also a weapon she didn't have. I don't trust you, she said. Good. You shouldn't. Trust is earned. He pulled out a folder and set it on the table between them. But results speak louder than promises. That's a list of journalists, politicians, and guild leaders who owe me favors. Give me your next article, and I'll make sure it reaches people who can actually do something with it. Adrian didn't touch the folder. And if I refuse? Then you keep fighting alone. Keep getting threats. Keep watching your family business crumble. Keep hoping your words are enough. He stood. But we both know they're not. Ashford has weathered worse storms than one brave woman with a pen. He'll wait you out, wear you down, and eventually erase you, unless you're willing to fight dirty. I'm not interested in your war with Ashford. No, you're interested in justice. But justice needs power to survive. I'm offering you power. He tapped the folder. Think about it. You know where to find me. He left, and Adrienne sat alone with the folder between her hands like a coiled snake. She didn't open it. Not that day. But she didn't throw it away either. That night, the threats turned physical. She woke to breaking glass. Downstairs in the parlor, she grabbed the fireplace poker from beside her bed and crept to the stairs. Voices below, male, rough, laughing. Just a warning. Boss says make it clear. Think she'll get the message? If she doesn't, next time we'll make it clearer. Footsteps. The front door opening and closing. Silence. Adrian descended slowly, poker raised. The parlor was destroyed. Furniture overturned. Books scattered. The window shattered. And on the wall, painted in dripping black letters, "Shut your mouth, or we'll shut it for you." Clara appeared at the top of the stairs, candle shaking in her hand. She looked at the room, looked at Adrian. Didn't say a word, but her expression said everything. By morning, Clara had made arrangements to visit a cousin in the southern provinces. "Just until this blows over," she said, packing with methodical efficiency. I won't live like this, Adrian, waiting for violence." "I understand. Do you?" Clara stopped, meeting her eyes. "Do you really? Because from where I'm standing, you're so focused on being right that you can't see the damage you're causing to everyone around you. They broke into your home, threatened us, and you're angry at me?" "I'm angry that you gave them a reason." Clara's composure cracked. "You could have stayed quiet, could have lived your life, but you had to be righteous. Had to take on a man who has more power in his little finger than our entire family will ever have. And now look at what it's cost." Adrienne had no answer. What could she say? That Clara was wrong? She wasn't. That it was worth it? She didn't know anymore. Clara left that afternoon. The boarding house stood empty except for Adrienne and the echoes of breaking glass. She opened Thornton's folder. The list was extensive. Names she recognized, influential people in shipping, politics, reform movements. Thornton had reach, real reach, and if he was willing to use it. She wrote to him that night, short, to the point. "I'll work with you, but I want protections for the workers in writing, and I want your word that you'll implement reforms in any territories you acquire from Ashford." His response came the next day. "You have my word, and my resources." Let's make history, Miss Hale. The third article came out a week later, but this time it wasn't just in workers' pamphlets and reform newsletters. It appeared in major regional papers, trade journals, even a political gazette that circulated among government officials. Thornton's reach was everything he'd promised. The article detailed not just Thornmere, but a pattern. 5 years of accidents, dozens of deaths, systematic corner cutting, and regulatory violations. And at the center of it all, Duke Victor Ashford's signature on document after document, approving the very policies that led to preventable tragedies. The public response was explosive. Protests grew. Not just workers now, but middle-class reformers, religious leaders calling for moral accountability, even rival industrialists sensing blood in the water. Questions were raised in Parliament. An investigation was called for. And in his northern estate, Duke Victor Ashford stopped being invisible. He issued a public statement, cold, calculated. He expressed sympathy for the families of the deceased, promised a comprehensive internal review, announced a fund for worker safety improvements. On paper, it looked like accountability, but Adrienne knew better. It was damage control, misdirection, and underneath the polished words, a clear message: I'm still in control. Thornton invited her to a meeting in his city offices, a sprawling building of steel and glass that screamed modern wealth. His private office was all dark wood and leather chairs, with windows overlooking the industrial quarter. "You've done excellent work," he said, pouring brandy without asking if she wanted any. "The investigation alone will tie Ashford up for months, and the public pressure is forcing him to spend resources defending himself instead of attacking you. He's still dangerous." "Of course he is. Men like Ashford don't surrender. They regroup." Thornton handed her a glass. "Which is why we need to push harder. I have sources inside his operation. They're willing to leak more documents, financial records showing how he's been hiding profits offshore to avoid paying proper wages." Adrienne set down the brandy untouched. "How much of this is about justice, and how much is about you winning? Does it matter? You get what you want. The workers get protections, and I get market advantage. Everyone wins except Ashford." "That's not how the world works." "No? Then how does it work, Miss Hale? Tell me. Because from where I'm sitting, you're learning the same lesson every idealist eventually learns. Change doesn't happen because we're right. It happens because we're powerful enough to force it." She hated that he might be right, hated that her crusade for truth had become entangled with corporate warfare. But what choice did she have? Walk away? Let Ashford win? "What do you need from me?" she asked. "Keep writing. Keep the pressure on. I'll handle the rest." He leaned back. "And Adrienne, be careful. Ashford's been quiet lately. That's not a good sign." Thornton was right. The Duke had gone silent. No more public statements, no more obvious retaliation. Even the men watching the boarding house had disappeared. It should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like the pause before thunder. Adrienne returned to Millhaven wary. The boarding house was too quiet, too empty without Clara. She slept poorly, waking at every sound, expecting violence that never came. 2 weeks passed. 3. The investigation into Ashford Industries continued. More articles were published. The pressure mounted. And then, on a cold morning in late winter, everything changed. She was at the docks, meeting with Marcus Webb to go over new documents, when she heard the commotion, shouting, running feet, people rushing toward the harbor. "What's happening?" she asked a passing sailor. "Fire," he said, breathless. "Up north, one of the big factories, Ashford's main processing plant." Her blood went cold. "Thornmere?" "No, Irongate, the steel works. They're saying it's bad. Real bad." Marcus grabbed her arm. "You can't go up there." "I'm not." But her mind was racing. A fire. At Ashford's most profitable factory, right when he was under investigation and losing public support. It was too convenient. She found Thornton at his office that afternoon. He was in a meeting, but when she barged in anyway, he dismissed the others without complaint. "Did you do this?" she demanded. "Do what?" "The fire. Irongate. Did you sabotage Ashford's factory?" Thornton's expression didn't change. "That's a serious accusation." "That's not an answer." He stood, walking to the window. For a long moment, he just looked out at the city below. Then, "Fires happen in factories, Miss Hale. Dangerous work, volatile materials. You of all people should understand how industrial accidents occur." "This wasn't an accident. Can you prove that?" She couldn't. That was the problem. But every instinct screamed that Thornton had crossed a line she hadn't agreed to. "We're supposed to be exposing Ashford's crimes," she said, "not committing our own. We're supposed to be winning." He turned to face her. "You wanted change, real change. That requires real action. Ashford won't reform because we ask nicely. He'll reform because he has no choice, because his empire is crumbling and he can't stop it. People could have died in that fire. People are dying in his minds every day. Where's your moral outrage about that? That's different, and you know it. Is it? Thornton moved closer. You came to me because words weren't enough, because you needed power. Well, this is what power looks like. It's not clean, it's not noble, but it's effective. Adrienne felt sick. I didn't agree to this. You agreed to work with me. You agreed to fight dirty. Did you think that meant anything less than whatever it takes? He softened slightly. Look, I understand your discomfort. I do. But we're at war, and in war, sometimes good people have to do hard things for the right reasons. No. She stepped back. No, this is wrong. This isn't justice. It's just revenge with better branding. Then walk away. His voice went cold. Go back to your little articles and your moral high ground. See how far that gets you when Ashford recovers and comes after you with everything he has. Because he will, Adrienne. He will destroy you, and without me, you have nothing to stop him. She wanted to argue, wanted to find the flaw in his logic. But standing there, in his office of glass and steel, she realized the terrible truth. She'd made a deal with the devil to fight a demon, and now she was standing in hell wondering how she got there. I need time, she said quietly. Time is a luxury. Make your choice. She left without answering. The streets were chaos with news of the fire. 17 workers injured, 3 dead. The factory gutted. Ashford's stock prices plummeting. Thornton's companies already moving to acquire the damaged assets at a fraction of their worth. And Adrienne walked through it all, numb. She'd wanted to expose corruption. Instead, she'd become part of it. That night, alone in the empty boarding house, she read her father's latest letter. He'd lost 2 more contracts. The warehouse was being foreclosed. He was selling the family home just to cover debts. I don't blame you, darling, he wrote. I know you believe you're doing the right thing, but please consider coming home. Let this fight go. We can rebuild. We can survive. But only if we're together. She folded the letter carefully, set it aside. Looked at the stack of articles she'd written, the evidence she'd gathered, the movement she'd started. And she made her decision. She would go north, to Irongate, to see the fire's aftermath herself, to understand what her alliance with Thornton had really cost. Because if she was going to keep fighting, if she was going to finish what she'd started, she needed to look at the damage with her own eyes, needed to own it, all of it. The train north left at dawn. Adrienne bought a ticket with money she didn't have and boarded with nothing but a travel bag and a heart full of dread. The countryside rolled past, frozen fields and distant forests, and she watched it all with the strange detachment of someone who'd crossed a line they couldn't uncross. Irongate was a factory town, all soot and smoke and the constant hammer of industry. The fire had happened 3 days ago, but you could still smell it, burned metal and chemicals, and something darker underneath. The factory stood like a skeleton, blackened beams reaching toward gray sky. Workers and their families clustered nearby, some crying, some just staring at the ruins of their livelihoods. Adrienne walked closer, her stomach twisting. This was her doing, not directly, but close enough. She'd allied with Thornton. She'd given him legitimacy, and he'd used it to do this. You shouldn't be here. The voice came from behind her, deep, familiar. She turned and found herself face to face with Duke Victor Ashford for the first time since the ballroom. He looked different, tired. His expensive coat was smudged with ash, his hands dirty from clearly working in the wreckage. And his eyes, those cold winter eyes, held something she hadn't expected. Grief. Your Grace, she said, because words felt necessary even though nothing felt adequate. Miss Hale. He didn't sound angry, just resigned. Come to survey your handiwork? This wasn't, didn't you? He stepped closer. You started this war. You allied with Thornton. Did you really think he'd fight with honor? I wanted accountability, not this. And yet here we are. He looked past her at the ruined factory. 3 dead, 17 injured, hundreds out of work. All because you and Thornton decided I was the villain worth destroying. Guilt choked her. I'm sorry. Sorry. He laughed, bitter and sharp. Sorry doesn't rebuild factories, doesn't bring back the dead, doesn't undo the damage. He met her eyes again. You wanted to expose me as a monster. Congratulations. You've become one yourself. The words hit like physical blows, because they were true. All of it. I never wanted this, she whispered. Neither did I. And for just a moment, his expression cracked. Pain. Real pain. But we don't always get what we want, do we, Miss Hale? He turned and walked back toward the factory ruins, leaving her standing alone in the cold. And Adrienne realized, with horrible clarity, that she'd been so focused on fighting a system that she'd forgotten the people caught in the machinery, including herself. The walk back from the factory ruins felt like walking through water, every step heavier than the last. Adrienne's mind kept replaying the Duke's face, that flash of raw pain before his mask slammed back into place. She'd spent months building him up as a monster in her head, a tyrant who valued profit over people. Easy to hate, easy to fight. But monsters didn't stand in the ashes of their own factories with soot on their hands and grief in their eyes. She found a small inn on the edge of Iron Gate and paid for a room she couldn't afford. The innkeeper, an older woman with suspicious eyes, took her money without comment. News of the fire had everyone on edge, strangers viewed with hostility. Adrienne sat on the narrow bed and pulled out the letters she'd been carrying, her father's pleas, the widow's gratitude, Thornton's promises. All of them felt like pieces of different puzzles that didn't fit together anymore. A knock interrupted her spiral. She opened the door to find a young man, maybe 20, with worker's calluses and nervous energy. Miss Hale? Yes? Name's Daniel. I worked at the factory. Some of us heard you were in town. We want to talk. About what? About what really happened. 20 minutes later, she was in a cramped apartment above a butcher shop, surrounded by 6 factory workers. They looked exhausted, angry, scared. Daniel sat forward, hands clasped between his knees. The fire wasn't an accident. Adrienne's stomach dropped. How do you know? Because I saw them. A woman named Ruth spoke up, her voice shaking. 2 men. Night before the fire. They weren't workers. Didn't belong there. But they had papers, official looking, so the night guard let them in. Did you recognize them? No, but one of them dropped something, a badge or token, had Thornton's company seal on it. The room spun slightly. Adrienne gripped the edge of her chair. You're certain? Saw it clear as day, Ruth said. Picked it up, meant to turn it in, but then the fire happened and everything went to hell. Still got it, though. She pulled a small brass token from her pocket and handed it over. Adrienne studied it. Thornton Industries. Unmistakable. Why are you telling me this? She asked quietly. Daniel's jaw tightened. Because word is you're working with Thornton, fighting the Duke. And we want you to know, whatever you think you're doing, whatever justice you think you're bringing, it's built on our blood. 3 of our friends died in that fire, another man said. 17 more got hurt. And for what? So Thornton can buy up the assets cheap? So you can feel righteous about taking down a rich man? The accusation stung because it was true. Partially, horribly true. I didn't know, Adrienne said. I swear I didn't know he was planning this. But you knew he wasn't clean, Ruth said. You knew he was using you. And you let him anyway. Silence fell like a weight. What do you want from me? Adrienne asked. Stop helping him, Daniel said. Whatever deal you made, break it. Because we're not pawns in some corporate war. We're people, and we're dying while you and Thornton play your games. She wanted to defend herself, to explain that she'd been trying to help, trying to force accountability. But looking at their faces, these people who'd lost friends, jobs, safety, the words turned to ash in her mouth. I'll make this right, she said. How? I don't know yet, but I will. They didn't look convinced. She didn't blame them. Back at the inn, Adrienne sat at the small writing desk and began composing a letter to Thornton, then stopped, then started again. The words wouldn't come right. How did you tell someone you'd realized they were the villain all along? that you'd been complicit in crimes you'd claimed to be fighting against. She was still staring at blank paper when someone pounded on her door. "Miss Hale! Fire! There's a fire!" She bolted into the hallway. Smoke was already seeping up through the floorboards. The innkeeper was shouting, rousing guests, her face pale with terror. Adrienne ran downstairs. The ground floor was filling with smoke, gray and choking. Through the haze, she could see flames in the kitchen, spreading fast. "Everyone out!" the innkeeper screamed. "Out!" Guests stumbled through the front door into the cold night. Adrienne helped an elderly man down the stairs, his hand shaking on her arm. Outside, people clustered in the street, coughing, crying, watching the inn burn. "Is everyone out?" Adrienne asked the innkeeper. "I think... Wait, where's Margaret? The girl in room 7? Adrienne's blood went cold. She looked up at the building. Second floor, third window from the left. Smoke poured from the gaps around the frame. "I'll get her," she said. "You can't..." But Adrienne was already moving, back through the door into the smoke-filled lobby. The heat hit her like a wall. She pulled her shawl over her mouth and nose and climbed the stairs, bent low where the air was clearer. The second-floor hallway was an inferno. Flames crawled up the walls, ceiling crackling overhead. She could barely see 3 feet ahead. "Margaret!" she screamed. "Margaret, where are you?" A cough, faint, from the end of the hall. Adrienne ran, heat searing her skin. Room 7's door was closed but not locked. She kicked it open. Inside, a girl, maybe 16, lay crumpled near the window, overcome by smoke. Adrienne grabbed her under the arms and dragged her toward the door. The girl was small but dead weight. Every step felt impossible. Behind them, part of the ceiling collapsed with a roar of flame and timber. They weren't going to make it through the hallway. Adrienne looked at the window. Second story. Maybe a 15-foot drop. Survivable if they landed right. She smashed the window with a chair, knocked out the remaining glass with her shawl, and looked down. A group of men had gathered below, shouting, holding out a canvas tarp. "Jump!" someone yelled. "We'll catch you!" Adrienne pulled Margaret to the window. The girl was barely conscious, eyes rolling. "I need you to trust me," Adrienne said, knowing she probably couldn't hear. "This is going to hurt, but you're going to live." She pushed Margaret through the window. The girl fell, arms flailing, and hit the tarp with a collective grunt from the men holding it. They lowered her quickly, shouting for a doctor. Adrienne climbed onto the sill. The drop looked farther from up here. The flames were at her back, heat blistering. She could smell her own hair singeing. She jumped. The impact drove the air from her lungs. Hands grabbed her, pulled her off the tarp, lowered her to the ground. Someone threw a blanket around her shoulders. Someone else was asking if she was hurt. She couldn't answer, could barely breathe, just lay there, staring up at the burning building, and thought, 2 fires in 3 days. That's not coincidence. The Iron Gate Volunteer Brigade arrived, men with buckets and a hand-pump cart. They fought the blaze for 2 hours before finally containing it. The inn was a loss, but they'd stopped it from spreading to neighboring buildings. Adrienne sat wrapped in a blanket on the edge of the crowd, watching. Margaret had been taken to a doctor but would survive. The innkeeper was coordinating with neighbors for temporary housing. Everything moved around Adrienne like she was a stone in a river. That was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. She didn't need to look to know who was speaking. The Duke's voice had become familiar, even in her nightmares. He sat down beside her on the cold ground, still in his ash-stained coat. Up close, she could see burns on his hands, blisters forming. "Your hands," she said. "Helped with the bucket line. They'll heal." He looked at her. "You went into a burning building." "So did you, at your factory." "That's different. Those were my workers, my responsibility." Margaret was a person. That's responsibility enough. Something shifted in his expression. Not softening exactly, but reassessing. "You're bleeding," he said, nodding at her arm. She looked down. A long cut from the broken window, blood soaking through her sleeve. She hadn't even felt it. "Come on," he said, standing and offering his hand. "My doctor's at the manor. You need that looked at." "I'm not going anywhere with you." "Miss Hale, you just jumped from a burning building and you're losing blood. Your pride can wait for medical attention." She wanted to argue, but her arm was starting to throb, and dark spots danced at the edges of her vision. She took his hand. The Ashford estate was 20 minutes outside Irongate, a sprawling manor house surrounded by winter bare gardens. Servants moved efficiently, clearly accustomed to crisis. The Duke led Adrienne to a sitting room where an older man with a medical bag was already waiting. "Dr. Carlyle, this is Miss Hale. She needs stitches." The doctor took one look at her arm and tisked, "Sit. Don't move." While Carlyle cleaned and stitched the wound, 10 stitches, precise and painful, the Duke stood by the window, silent. Adrienne watched him when she could bear to look away from the needle. His shoulders were tight, his jaw set. Whatever he was thinking, it wasn't peaceful. "Done," Carlyle said finally. "Keep it clean, no heavy lifting for a week, and for heaven's sake, stay out of burning buildings." "I'll try," Adrienne said. The doctor left. The Duke remained by the window. "Why did you help me?" Adrienne asked. "You needed help." "That's not an answer." He turned. "No, it's not." He moved to a small bar cart and poured 2 glasses of brandy, handed her one. "Drink. It'll help with the shock." She took it, but didn't drink. "The fire at the inn, that wasn't an accident either, was it?" His eyes sharpened. "What makes you say that?" "Because 2 fires in 3 days is enemy action, not bad luck." "Enemy," he considered the word. "Is that what we are?" "I don't know what we are anymore." The Duke sat down across from her, brandy glass cradled in his burned hands. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the crackle of the fireplace. Smaller, contained, safe. "I didn't sabotage my own factory," he said finally, "in case you were wondering." "I know." His eyebrows rose. "Do you?" "Workers told me. They saw Thornton's men." She pulled out the brass token and set it on the table between them. "Found this at the scene." The Duke picked it up, studied it, then set it down with the careful precision of a man controlling fury. "And the inn fire?" "I don't know. Could be Thornton covering tracks. Could be someone else entirely. Could be warning you." The words hung heavy. Adrienne took a small sip of brandy. It burned going down. "I made a deal with the devil," she said quietly. "I thought I was fighting for justice. Turns out I was just a weapon in someone else's war." "Yes." No judgment in his voice, just acknowledgement. "Thornton's been after my territory for years. He's patient, strategic, and apparently willing to kill for market advantage." "I didn't know." "I believe you." He leaned forward. "But intention doesn't absolve action, Miss Hale. You allied with him. You gave him legitimacy. And now people are dead because of it." The guilt was a living thing in her chest. "I know." "So what are you going to do about it?" She looked at him, really looked. At the burns on his hands, the exhaustion in his eyes, the ash still smudged on his jaw. He'd been fighting fires while she'd been making them. "I'm going to help you," she said, "if you'll let me." "Help me do what?" "Expose Thornton. Prove he sabotaged your factory. Make sure he faces the same accountability I wanted for you." The Duke studied her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "Why?" "Because it's right. Because people died and he needs to answer for that. Because—" She paused. "Because I was wrong about you. Not about everything. Your minds still need reform. Your workers still deserve better. But wrong about who you are, and I need to make that right." "Redemption?" There was something almost sad in his voice. "That what you're after?" "Justice," she corrected, "for everyone, including the people I hurt trying to hurt you." He was quiet for so long she thought he'd refuse. Then, all right. "We'll work together. Expose Thornton, protect the workers." He stood, moving to his desk. "But I have conditions." "Of course you do." He pulled out documents, spread them across the desk. "You want accountability? Here. Safety reform proposals for all my operations, wage increases, compensation structures for injured workers and families of the deceased. I've been drafting them since the investigation started." He looked at her. "I'm not the monster you made me out to be. But I'm not a saint either. I've made choices, hard choices, that cost lives. And I have to live with that. But if we're going to do this, if we're going to fight Thornton, then we do it right. We actually fix the problems you identified. No more half measures." Adrienne moved to the desk, scanned the documents. They were comprehensive, detailed, real reforms, not just public relations. Why now? She asked. Why not before? Pride mostly, stubbornness, the belief that I knew best. He met her eyes. You were right about that much. I stopped listening to anyone who challenged me, and people died because of it. That's on me. It was the closest thing to an apology she'd ever heard from an aristocrat, and somehow it meant more than polished words ever could. All right, she said. Partners? Partners, he agreed, though I reserve the right to argue with you. I'd be disappointed if you didn't. They shook hands. His grip was firm, his palm rough with calluses she hadn't expected a duke to have. Now, he said, releasing her hand, we need evidence, real evidence, not just a token. If we're going to bring down Thornton, we need to prove beyond doubt that he orchestrated the sabotage. The workers saw his men. Testimony can be disputed. We need documents, orders, something that ties him directly to the crime. Adrienne thought, he keeps records. I've been to his office. He's meticulous. Can you get back in? Maybe, if I play it right. Tell him I'm still committed to the cause, that the fire shook me, but I'm ready to keep fighting. She paused. He'll believe it. He thinks I need him. It's dangerous. So is everything else we're doing. The Duke smiled slightly. It was the first time she'd seen anything close to humor on his face. You know, when you challenged me at that ballroom, I thought you were just another naive reformer playing at politics. And now? Now I think you're a naive reformer with a death wish, but at least you're committed. Is that a compliment? From me? Absolutely. They spent the next hour planning. The Duke would continue public reforms, showing he was serious about change. That would ease worker tensions and build goodwill. Meanwhile, Adrienne would reach out to Thornton, pretend the fires had rattled her into renewed determination. Get close. Find evidence. If he suspects you're turning, the Duke warned, he won't hesitate to eliminate you, permanently. I know. And if this goes wrong, I can't protect you. Can't risk looking like we're aligned before we have proof. I understand. He studied her. You really are reckless, aren't you? Only when it matters. By the time Adrienne left the estate, dawn was breaking over the eastern hills. The Duke's carriage took her back to Irongate, where she collected what remained of her belongings from the burned inn. Most of her clothes were ash, but she'd kept the important things close. Documents, letters, evidence. She sent a telegram to Thornton. Need to meet. Things have escalated. We need to talk strategy. His response came within the hour. My office, tomorrow, 2 p.m. She had 1 day to prepare. 1 day to become convincing enough to fool a man who'd killed for profit. The train back south felt longer than the journey north had. Adrienne watched the countryside blur past and rehearsed lies in her head. She had to make Thornton believe she was still his weapon, still useful, still controllable. By the time she reached his office the next day, she'd almost convinced herself. Thornton greeted her warmly, concern painted on his features. Adrienne, I heard about the fire. Are you all right? Shaken, but alive. She sat without being asked, projecting exhaustion she didn't have to fake. We need to accelerate. Accelerate? The fires. People are dying, Gregory. I went to Irongate. I saw what happened. And I realized we can't wait for investigations and public pressure. Ashford's too entrenched. We need to force his hand. Thornton's expression shifted, calculation replacing concern. What are you suggesting? We leak the financial records now. Don't wait for perfect timing. Hit him while he's vulnerable, while the factory fire has him off balance. She leaned forward. You said you had sources inside his operation. Use them. Get everything. Offshore accounts, wage manipulation, safety violations. Dump it all at once. Bury him. That's aggressive. That's necessary. People are watching now. The fires made them pay attention. If we strike now, we end this. He studied her, those sharp eyes searching for deception. She met his gaze without flinching, channeled every ounce of righteous fury she'd felt months ago in that ballroom, before everything got complicated. You've changed, he said slowly. I've learned. You were right. Change doesn't come from being right. It comes from being powerful enough to force it. A smile spread across his face. "Welcome to the real fight, Miss Hale." He pulled out files, thick folders full of documents she recognized. Some she'd helped compile, others new. Financial records, internal memos, safety inspection reports altered to hide violations. "This is everything," he said. "Release this, and Ashford's finished, bankrupt, possibly imprisoned." Adrianne's heart pounded. This was it, the evidence. But she needed more than just Ashford's crimes. She needed proof of Thornton's. "What about the factory fire?" she asked casually. "Can we tie that to his negligence? Make it another nail in his coffin?" Thornton hesitated, just for a second, but she saw it. "The investigation's still ongoing," he said carefully. "We don't want to overreach. But if we could prove he caused it somehow, cut corners that led to the fire, that would be perfect." Yes, perfect. He was watching her now, really watching. Why the sudden interest in the fire specifically? "Because 3 people died," she said, letting emotion leak into her voice. "I want him to pay for that most of all." "Of course." He closed the folders. "Let me handle that angle. You focus on preparing the financial disclosure. I'll have my people deliver it to the major papers next week." "Next week? I thought we were accelerating." "We are. But we need to time it right. Make sure it lands with maximum impact." He stood, signaling the meeting was ending. "Trust me, Adrianne. I've been doing this longer than you. We'll destroy him, but we'll do it smart." She wanted to push, wanted to demand more, but pushing would look suspicious. So she nodded, collected copies of the files, and left. But she didn't go far. She waited in a coffee house across the street, watching the building's entrance. 3 hours later, 2 men emerged, the same 2 Ruth had described seeing at the factory. They headed west toward the industrial quarter. Adrianne followed. The men led her to a warehouse on the edge of the shipping district. Thornton's warehouse. She recognized it from the company seal on the door. They went inside. Adrianne circled the building, found a window, peered through. Inside, crates and equipment. And in the back office, visible through interior windows, Thornton meeting with the 2 men. Money changing hands, documents signed. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see enough. Thornton passing over another token, another assignment, and on his desk, spread out in clear view, architectural plans of Ashford's primary coal processing facility. The next target. Adrianne's blood turned to ice. He wasn't done. The factory fire was just the beginning. He was going to keep sabotaging Ashford's operations until there was nothing left to buy but rubble. She needed to tell the Duke, needed to warn him. But before she could move, someone grabbed her from behind. A hand clamped over her mouth, an arm around her waist, lifting her off her feet. "Quiet," a voice hissed in her ear, "or I break your neck right here." She was dragged into the alley, away from the window, thrown against the wall hard enough to rattle her teeth. 2 men. Not the ones from the warehouse. Different, hired muscle. "Thornton said you might be a problem," the first one said. "Said to make sure you understand what happens to problems." The second pulled a knife, short blade, wickedly sharp. "We're going to hurt you," he said conversationally. "Not kill you. Not yet. Boss wants you scared first. Compliant." He moved closer. "So let's start with that pretty face." Adrianne drove her knee into his groin with everything she had. He went down gasping. She grabbed the first man's wrist as he reached for her, twisted hard. He was stronger, but she was desperate. She bit his hand until he screamed and released her. Then she ran, behind her shouting, "Pursuit!" She tore through the alley, hit the main street, kept running. People stared, some moved to help. Most just watched. She didn't stop until she reached a constable station 3 blocks away. Inside, gasping, bleeding from a reopened cut on her arm, she demanded to see whoever was in charge. The constable on duty looked skeptical. "Miss, you need to calm down. Gregory Thornton is planning to sabotage the Ashford coal facility," she said, loud enough to carry. "I have proof, and he just tried to have me killed for knowing about it." That got attention. Within an hour, she was sitting in an interrogation room telling everything to a chief inspector named Morrison. He listened, taking notes, expression carefully neutral. "These are serious accusations, Miss Hale." "I know." "Against a prominent businessman." I know that too. And you're asking me to believe that Gregory Thornton, respected industrialist and reformer, is actually a saboteur and would-be murderer. I'm asking you to investigate. Send men to his warehouse and search his office. You'll find the plans, the evidence, everything you need. Morrison leaned back. And what were you doing at his warehouse? Spying? Gathering evidence. For whom? She hesitated. If she admitted working with the Duke, it would undermine everything, look like a conspiracy. But if she didn't, for justice, she said finally. Same reason I exposed Ashford's mine violations. Because someone has to. Morrison studied her, then stood. Wait here. He left. She waited. An hour passed, then 2. She asked for water and got it, asked when she could leave and got no answer. Finally, Morrison returned. His expression was grim. We sent men to the warehouse, he said. Found nothing. What? Empty. Cleared out. Whatever was there, it's gone now. No, that wasn't possible. He knew. Someone warned him. Or you were mistaken about what you saw. I wasn't mistaken. Miss Hale. Morrison sat down across from her. I'm going to be frank. Your history with both Ashford and Thornton is complicated. You've made accusations before, started public feuds. Some might say you're unreliable. Some might be protecting Thornton. His jaw tightened. I don't appreciate the implication. And I don't appreciate being called a liar when I'm trying to prevent mass murder. They stared at each other across the table. I can't arrest a man based on your word alone, Morrison said finally. Bring me real evidence, documents, witnesses who aren't you. Then I'll move. But until then, my hands are tied. By the time I have that, people will be dead. Then you'd better work fast. He released her with a warning not to leave the city. Adrienne walked out into the night, mind racing. Thornton knew she'd turned. The warehouse was cleaned out. The evidence was gone. And the constables weren't going to help. She had one option left. She went straight to the telegraph office and sent an urgent message. Thornton knows. Planning to hit coal facility. Need to meet now. The response came 30 minutes later. Ashford Manor, midnight. Come alone. It was already 11. She hired a carriage, paid double for speed, and headed north into the darkness. The manor was lit when she arrived, every window blazing against the night. A servant met her at the door and led her not to the sitting room but to a large study lined with maps and ledgers. The Duke was there, along with 3 men she didn't recognize. One wore a constable's uniform. The others looked military. Miss Hale, the Duke said. These are Captain Morris, Lieutenant Shaw, and Inspector Davies. I've brought them up to speed. On what? Everything. Your investigation. Thornton's sabotage. The threat to the coal facility. He gestured to a map spread across the desk. We're moving tonight. Constables and my private security will be stationed at the facility. If Thornton's men try anything, we'll catch them in the act. Adrienne's breath caught. You believe me? You jumped into a burning building to save someone you didn't know. You could have stayed silent, stayed safe. Instead, you came here. Yes, Miss Hale. I believe you. Relief and fear mixed in equal measure. Thornton's not stupid. If he knows I've turned, he might call it off. Or he might assume you're discredited, that no one will believe you. The Duke met her eyes. Either way, we'll be ready. Captain Morris stepped forward. We'll need you there, Miss Hale. If it goes to trial, your testimony will be crucial. You're the witness who can tie Thornton directly to the conspiracy. If we survive the night, Lieutenant Shaw added grimly. The Duke silenced him with a look. We will, because we'll be prepared. Miss Hale, can you identify the men you saw at the warehouse? Yes. Good. Then you'll be with me, under protection. If they show up, you point them out to the constables. It was a plan. Risky, dangerous, possibly suicidal, but it was something. They left within the hour. The coal facility was 10 miles north, a sprawling complex of processing buildings and storage structures. In the darkness, it looked like a sleeping giant. Constables took positions around the perimeter. The Duke's security forces, armed men who looked more like soldiers than guards, stationed themselves at key points, and Adrienne waited with the Duke in the main office, watching through dark windows. Midnight passed. Then 1 in the morning. 2. Nothing moved except the wind. Maybe he called it off, Adrian whispered. Maybe. 3 o'clock. Still nothing. At 3:30, one of the constables signaled. Movement, east side. Adrian and the Duke moved to the window. In the darkness, barely visible, 3 figures approached the main processing building. They moved with purpose, carrying bags. That's them, Adrian breathed. The 2 from the warehouse, and a third. The Duke signaled Captain Morris. Take them, alive if possible. Morris and his men moved in, silent as shadows. The figures reached the building, started setting something up. Charges, Adrian realized. They were going to blow it. Morris's voice rang out. Constabulary, stay where you are. The figures scattered. One ran directly into a constable and went down hard. Another made it 10 feet before being tackled. The third pulled a gun and fired. The shot echoed across the facility. Someone screamed. Adrian couldn't tell who. Then chaos. More gunfire, shouting. The Duke pushed Adrian down behind the desk as windows shattered. Stay down, he ordered. But through the broken window she could see the third man running, not away, but toward the office. Toward them. The door burst open. The man came through, gun raised. The Duke stepped between him and Adrian. Don't, Victor said quietly. The man laughed, wild-eyed, desperate. Thornton said no witnesses, said make it clean. He aimed at the Duke's chest. Nothing personal. Adrian moved without thinking, grabbed a heavy ledger from the desk and threw it. The man dodged, but it bought a second. The Duke lunged forward, grabbed the gun hand, twisted. They struggled. The gun discharged. Once, twice. Adrian couldn't tell if anyone was hit. Then Captain Morris was there, slamming the man against the wall, disarming him with brutal efficiency. Silence. Ringing ears, smoke from gunpowder. The Duke stood, breathing hard. Are you hurt? Adrian checked herself. No, you? Fine. But his hand was shaking. Morris hauled the saboteur to his feet. You're under arrest. Attempted sabotage, attempted murder, conspiracy. I want a lawyer, the man spat, and I'm not saying nothing without one. Don't need you to, the Duke said coldly. We have witnesses, we have you in the act, and we have your accomplices. He looked at Morris. Get him out of my sight. The other 2 saboteurs were already in custody, along with the explosives they'd been setting. Constables secured the scene. No one had been killed, though one guard had taken a bullet to the shoulder. As dawn broke over the facility, Adrian stood outside with the Duke, watching the constables work. It's not over, she said. Thornton will claim he knew nothing, that these men acted alone. Probably. The Duke looked exhausted. But it's a start. Their testimony, combined with what you witnessed, combined with the evidence we gather, it builds a case. Slowly. But it builds. He tried to kill you tonight. He tried to kill both of us. Failed at both. He glanced at her. That ledger throw was either brilliant or insane. Probably both. Seems to be your specialty. Something in his voice made her look at him. Really look. He was smiling slightly. Tired, but genuine. We make a good team, she said quietly. Don't sound so surprised. I spent months hating you. And I spent months dismissing you. Seems we've both learned better. The moment stretched between them. Not romantic, too raw and dangerous for that. But something. Recognition, maybe. Respect earned through fire and blood and shared survival. Inspector Davies approached. Your Grace, Miss Hale, the men are talking, offering to testify against Thornton in exchange for reduced sentences. The Duke straightened. Get it in writing, every word, and get it to the magistrate before Thornton's lawyers can interfere. Already on it, sir. As Davies left, the Duke turned to Adrian. You should go. Get somewhere safe. Thornton will retaliate once he realizes his men were caught. Where exactly is safe when you've made an enemy of a man like that? Fair point, he considered. Then stay here. Guest quarters. Armed guards. Until we have Thornton in custody. I can take care of myself. Yes, I've noticed. But you don't have to. Not alone. Not anymore. The offer was simple, practical, but it felt like more than that. Like an alliance evolving into something deeper. All right, she said. For now. They walked back toward the facility offices as the sun rose fully, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Behind them, constables secured evidence. Ahead, somewhere in the city, Thornton was learning his plan had failed. And between them, an enemy who'd become an unlikely partner, Adrienne felt something shift. The war wasn't over. But the sides had changed. Now she just had to survive long enough to see it through. The guest quarters at Ashford Manor were nicer than anywhere Adrienne had ever slept. High ceilings, a four-poster bed with actual curtains, windows overlooking gardens that would be beautiful once winter released its grip. A servant brought breakfast on silver trays. Another offered to press her clothes. She felt like an imposter playing at being nobility. But when she tried to refuse the attention, the head housekeeper, a stern woman named Mrs. Davies, gave her a look that could freeze fire. "His Grace's orders, miss. You're a guest under his protection. That means we treat you proper. Now sit down and eat before that toast gets cold." Adrienne sat, ate, felt the exhaustion of the last 48 hours settle into her bones like lead. She was nearly finished when the Duke appeared in the doorway. He'd changed clothes, washed the ash and smoke away, but the weariness remained in his eyes. "Inspector Davies sent word," he said without preamble. "All three men are cooperating. They've given detailed testimony about Thornton hiring them, planning the sabotage, everything." Adrienne set down her teacup carefully. "Will it be enough? For arrest? Yes. For conviction?" He paused. "That depends on what else we can find. Thornton's lawyers are already claiming the men are lying to reduce their sentences. We need documentation, proof of payment, communication between Thornton and the saboteurs. His office, the records have to be there. Which is why Inspector Davies is getting a warrant, should have it by this afternoon." The Duke moved into the room properly, standing by the window. Morning light made the burns on his hands more visible. "Once we have the warrant, we'll search his premises, seize all documents related to the sabotage. He's had time to destroy evidence. Maybe, but men like Thornton are meticulous. They keep records because they believe they're untouchable. That arrogance works against them." Adrienne joined him at the window. Outside, workers were already at the coal facility, repairing damage, reinforcing security. Life continuing despite the violence. "I need to be there," she said. "When you search his office, I know what to look for. I've seen his filing system." "Absolutely not." "Victor, no." He turned to face her. "Thornton already tried to have you killed once. If you show up during a raid, there's no telling what he'll do. Besides, your presence would undermine the investigation. Defense lawyers would claim you planted evidence." She wanted to argue, but he was right. Her involvement had already complicated things enough. "So I just wait here? Do nothing? You've done more than enough. You exposed him. You helped stop the sabotage. You risked your life multiple times." His expression softened slightly. "Let the law handle it from here." "The law?" she said bitterly. "The same law that ignored workers dying in your mines until I forced it to pay attention?" "Yes, that law, because as flawed as it is, it's still better than vigilante justice." He held her gaze. "I know you don't trust the system, but we're working within it now, changing it. That takes time." "People don't have time. Every day Thornton walks free is another day he could strike. Which is why Davies is moving fast. By tonight, Thornton will be in custody. I promise you that." Promises from a duke. A month ago, she would have laughed. Now, she found herself believing him. "Fine," she said, "but I want updates. Every step." Agreed. He left to coordinate with the constables. Adrienne paced the guest quarters like a caged animal, energy with nowhere to go. She tried to read, tried to rest. Couldn't do either. By midday, she was back downstairs, demanding to help with something, anything. Mrs. Davies put her to work reviewing the Duke's reform proposals, the documents he'd shown her days ago. Safety regulations, wage structures, compensation policies. "His Grace wants your input," Mrs. Davies said. "Says you know what workers actually need better than he does." So Adrienne read, made notes, suggested changes. It was strange using her voice this way, not shouting from the outside, but shaping policy from within. She strengthened protections for injured workers, added provisions for families of the deceased, flagged sections where corporate interests still outweighed human welfare. By late afternoon, she had 10 pages of amendments. The Duke found her in the library, surrounded by papers, ink on her fingers. "You've been busy," he observed. "Your proposals are good, but they don't go far enough in 3 areas." She handed him her notes. Enforcement mechanisms, independent safety inspections, and accountability structures when violations occur. He scanned her work, eyebrows rising. "This is thorough. I told you I understand numbers and systems. Your reforms work on paper, but without teeth, they're just expensive promises. And you've given them teeth." He looked at her with something like respect. "This is good work, Miss Hale." "Adrienne," she said, "if we're partners in reform, you can use my name." "Adrienne." He tested it, nodded. "Then you should call me Victor, at least in private." The informality felt strange, dangerous even, like stepping across a line she hadn't realized was there. "All right," she said. "Victor." Before either of them could say more, Inspector Davies arrived with news. "We have the warrant. Thornton's office, his warehouse, his personal residence, all approved for search and seizure." Davies looked grimly satisfied. "We move within the hour." Victor stood immediately. "I'm coming with you." "Your Grace, I don't think—" "I'm coming," Victor repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "He destroyed my factory, killed my workers, tried to sabotage another facility. I have every right to be there when you arrest him." Davies nodded reluctantly. "Very well, but you stay back. Let my men handle it." They left in a convoy, constables, investigators, the Duke's security. Adrienne watched from the manor steps, frustration eating at her. Mrs. Davies appeared beside her. "Hard, isn't it? Waiting." "I should be there." "No, dear. You should be safe. There's a difference." The older woman's voice was kind but firm. "You've fought your battle. Let others fight theirs." But it didn't feel finished. Wouldn't feel finished until Thornton was behind bars. The wait was agony. Hours crawled past. Adrienne tried to distract herself with more paperwork, but the words blurred. She moved to the library window, watching the drive for any sign of returning carriages. Evening fell, still nothing. Finally, near 8 o'clock, she heard horses. Ran to the entrance hall. The Duke strode in, face grim but eyes alive with something like satisfaction. "We got him," Victor said. "Thornton's in custody, and we found the evidence." Relief hit so hard she had to steady herself against the wall. "What evidence?" "Everything. Ledgers showing payments to the saboteurs, correspondence with his people about timing the factory fire to coincide with market fluctuations, even architectural plans for my facilities with notes on vulnerabilities." He pulled off his gloves. He kept it all, just like you said. Too arrogant to believe anyone would dare search his office. "Where is he now?" "Central lockup, under heavy guard. He'll be arraigned tomorrow." Victor's expression darkened. "He tried to bribe Davies, offered him £10,000 to lose the evidence. Davies arrested him on the spot for attempted corruption." Adrienne felt a fierce joy. "Good. There's more." Victor moved into the sitting room, poured himself a drink. "We found records of other sabotages, competitors' warehouses, shipping disruptions. He's been waging industrial warfare for years. You expose more than just one conspiracy, Adrienne. You've unraveled an entire criminal enterprise." The weight of it settled over her. All those months of fighting, of articles and evidence and risk, and it had led here. To justice. Real justice. "What happens now?" she asked. "Trials. Investigations. Probably months of legal proceedings." He looked at her. "You'll have to testify about what you witnessed, what Thornton told you. It won't be easy." "I know. His lawyers will attack your credibility. They'll bring up your feud with me, claim you're biased, make you look like a vindictive woman with an agenda. Let them try." She met his eyes. "I've been called worse by better people." Victor smiled slightly. "I believe that." They drank in comfortable silence. Outside, night settled over the estate. For the first time in months, Adrienne felt like she could breathe properly. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For believing me. For helping. For—" She paused. "For not being the monster I thought you were." "I was, though. In my own way. He stared into his glass. I let people suffer because it was easier than changing. Told myself it was just business, just the way things worked. And people died because of that willful blindness. But you're changing it now. We're changing it together. He raised his glass slightly. To uncomfortable partnerships. To justice, she corrected. However we get there. They toasted. And in that moment, Adrienne realized something had shifted fundamentally. This wasn't just about bringing down Thornton anymore. It was about building something better. Something that lasted beyond scandals and arrests. The arraignment the next morning was a circus. News had spread. The arrest of Gregory Thornton, prominent industrialist, on charges of sabotage and conspiracy to murder. The courthouse was packed with journalists, workers, rival businessmen, and curiosity seekers. Adrienne attended with Victor, sitting in the gallery. Thornton was led in wearing expensive clothes and a contemptuous expression. His lawyers flanked him like shields. The charges were read: sabotage, arson, conspiracy to commit murder, attempted bribery of a public official. The list went on. Thornton pled not guilty to everything. His lead lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Blackwood, immediately requested bail. My client is a respected member of the business community. He has deep ties to this region. He poses no flight risk. The prosecutor, a woman named Helena Cross, stood. Your Honor, the defendant orchestrated multiple acts of industrial terrorism resulting in deaths and extensive property damage. He attempted to bribe law enforcement, and he has the resources to flee the country. We request he be held without bail. The magistrate considered. Given the severity of the charges and the defendant's means, bail is denied. Trial date will be set for 6 weeks from today. Thornton's face went red. He started to protest, but his lawyer silenced him. As he was led away, his eyes found Adrienne in the gallery. The look he gave her was pure venom, a promise. She didn't look away. Outside the courthouse, journalists swarmed. Adrienne and Victor pushed through, declining to comment. But one reporter, a young woman from a Reform newspaper, called out, Miss Hale, is it true you were working with Thornton before you exposed him? Adrienne stopped, turned. Yes. Victor's hand touched her elbow in warning, but she shook it off. I was working with him, she continued, because I thought we wanted the same thing, accountability for industrial abuses. I was wrong. He wanted power, and he was willing to kill for it. She looked directly at the journalist. I exposed him because people's lives matter more than my pride, more than anyone's pride. What about your relationship with the Duke of Ashford? Another journalist shouted. You accused him of the same crimes you're now working together on. Were you wrong about him too? I was wrong about his intentions, Adrienne said carefully, but not about the need for reform. The Duke has agreed to implement comprehensive safety measures across all his operations. Real change. That's what matters. Some are saying you've been bought off, the first journalist pressed. That Ashford paid you to turn on Thornton. Victor stepped forward. Miss Hale has been bought by no one. She's been a thorn in my side and a catalyst for necessary change. The reforms being implemented are a direct result of her courage in exposing dangerous practices, mine included. He met the crowd's eyes. I suggest you focus less on conspiracy theories and more on the actual story. A criminal has been brought to justice because one woman refused to stay silent. The journalists exploded with more questions, but Victor's security moved them through to a waiting carriage. Inside, Adrienne let out a shaky breath. That was necessary, Victor finished. They'll write what they want regardless, but at least we've given them the truth to choose from. The carriage took them back to the estate. Over the following days, the story dominated headlines. Some papers painted Adrienne as a hero. Others called her a traitor to the reform movement for allying with Ashford. Still others suggested romantic entanglement, which made her want to throw things. But beneath the scandal and speculation, something real was happening. Workers at Ashford's mines and factories began seeing actual changes. Safety equipment was installed. Inspection schedules were implemented and followed. Wages increased. A fund was established for injured workers and families of the deceased. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't fast. But it was real. And other industrialists, watching Ashford avoid complete ruin by adapting, began implementing similar reforms. Not out of goodness, out of self-preservation. But the result was the same. Conditions improved. 3 weeks after Thornton's arrest, Adrienne received a letter, her father's handwriting. Dearest Adrienne, I've watched the news. Read the articles, and I need you to know I'm proud of you. Not for being right, though you were, but for having the courage to admit when you were wrong and the strength to fix it. The business is recovering, slowly. Some of our old contracts are being reinstated now that the scandal has shifted away from us. We won't be wealthy, but we'll survive. Come home when you're ready. There's always a place for you here. Your loving father. She read it 3 times, then cried. Relief and guilt and exhaustion all mixed together. Victor found her in the library, letter still in her hands. He didn't ask what was wrong, just sat down across from her and waited. My father, she said eventually. He forgives me. For everything. There's nothing to forgive. You fought for what you believed in. I nearly destroyed our family. You saved mine. The workers, the operations, the legacy. Without your crusade, I would have continued as I was until something catastrophic forced change. You gave me the opportunity to choose it instead. He leaned forward. That's worth celebrating, not mourning. She wiped her eyes. When did you become so philosophical? Somewhere between getting publicly humiliated and nearly dying in industrial fires. Tends to provide perspective. Despite everything, she laughed. I suppose it does. The trial began in late spring. The courthouse was even more packed than the arraignment had been. Adrienne testified on the second day, walking through everything. Her initial contact with Thornton, the documents he'd shared, the warehouse meeting, the attack, all of it. Blackwood, Thornton's lawyer, tried to shred her credibility. Miss Hale, isn't it true you had a personal vendetta against industrialists in general? I had concerns about worker safety. That's not a vendetta. Yet you publicly attacked the Duke of Ashford at a charity event, called him a murderer, if reports are accurate. I called him accountable for conditions in his mines, which he was. And now you're working with him, living at his estate. Some might say you've been compromised. Some might say I'm capable of changing my mind when presented with evidence of genuine reform, Adrienne shot back. Which is more than can be said for your client, who doubled down on criminal behavior even after being exposed. The gallery murmured. The judge called for order. Blackwood tried a different approach. You claim to have witnessed my client's men at his warehouse. But you were trespassing, were you not? Spying? I was gathering evidence of criminal activity. Evidence you then took to the Duke of Ashford, your supposed enemy turned ally. How convenient that this evidence targeted his biggest competitor. The evidence targeted a saboteur and would-be murderer. If Thornton's crime happened to benefit the Duke, that's correlation, not conspiracy. The back and forth continued for hours. By the end, Adrienne was exhausted, but she'd held her ground. Victor testified the next day, providing documentation of the damages, the deaths, the calculated nature of the attacks. Other witnesses followed, the saboteurs themselves, offering detailed testimony about Thornton's orders. Workers from the factory describing the fire. Inspector Davies presenting the evidence seized from Thornton's office. The prosecution built their case methodically, piece by piece. Thornton's defense tried to paint him as a victim of circumstance, a businessman targeted by jealous competitors and vengeful reformers. But the evidence was overwhelming. On the trial's 8th day, the jury deliberated for 4 hours. They returned with a verdict. Guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted. Journalists scrambled for the exits to file their stories. Workers in the gallery cheered. Thornton sat frozen, face white with shock. The judge sentenced him to 15 years hard labor and ordered him to pay restitution to all victims of his sabotage. As constables led him away, Thornton looked at Adrienne one last time. No venom now, just emptiness. She felt no triumph, just tired relief that it was finally over. Outside, the crowd was massive. Workers, reformers, journalists, all wanting to speak to the woman who'd brought down Thornton. Adrienne said a few words, thanked the investigators, the witnesses, the judge, emphasized that this was about justice, not revenge. Then she and Victor escaped to a quiet restaurant across the city. They ate in silence for a while, processing, decompressing. It's really over, Adrienne said finally. This part is. The reforms will take years to fully implement. There will be resistance, setbacks, people trying to roll back changes when attention shifts. Always the optimist. Always the realist. But he smiled, though I'll admit today was a good day. A very good day. They raised their glasses. Toast to justice served. What will you do now? Victor asked. Go back to your father? Return to the merchant business? Adrienne considered. A month ago, she would have said yes immediately. But now? I don't know, she admitted. The reforms need oversight. Someone to make sure promises become reality. Someone who understands both the workers' needs and the industry's constraints. Are you proposing a position? I'm proposing a partnership. You implement the reforms. I verify they're actually happening. We keep each other honest. Victor studied her. You realize that would mean staying, working together, constantly. I realize. And that people will talk, already are talking, actually, about us. Let them. She met his eyes. I didn't fight this hard to worry about gossip. No, you fought this hard because you believe people deserved better, and you were right. He set down his glass. All right, partners. In reform and accountability. They shook hands across the table, formal, professional, but something in the handshake felt like more than business. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Adrienne traveled to all of Victor's operations, meeting with workers, reviewing safety implementations, identifying gaps. She wrote reports, made recommendations, pushed back when corporate interests tried to undermine worker protections. Victor, for his part, actually listened, implemented her suggestions, brought her into strategy meetings with his managers. They argued constantly about costs, timelines, the balance between profitability and safety. But the arguments were productive. Two people with different perspectives working toward the same goal. Other industrialists noticed. Some mocked Victor for letting a woman influence his business. Others, seeing his operations stabilize and his reputation recover, quietly reached out to Adrienne for consulting. Within 6 months, she had her own small office in the Ashford Estates business wing. A title, Director of Worker Safety and Reform. A salary that made her father weep with relief when she told him. And a partnership with the Duke that had evolved into something neither of them had expected. Genuine friendship. One evening, working late on a report about mine ventilation systems, Victor knocked on her office door. Still here? He asked. Could say the same about you. Fair point. He entered, holding 2 glasses and a bottle of wine. I thought we could celebrate. Celebrate what? The northern mines passed inspection, all of them, perfect scores across the board. He poured wine, handed her a glass. That's every operation in our network now in full compliance. It's done, Adrienne. The reforms are complete. She stood, taking the glass, letting the magnitude sink in. We did it. You did it. I just signed the papers and paid the bills. You changed. That's harder than any reform. She raised her glass. To progress, however slow and painful. To partnership, he countered, however unlikely and argumentative. They drank. And in the quiet of the office, surrounded by evidence of change they'd fought for, Adrienne felt something settle. Not completion. The work would never be truly done, but accomplishment. Real, measurable, lasting accomplishment. Thank you, Victor said quietly, for not giving up on me. On this, even when I gave you every reason to. Thank you for proving people can change. Even stubborn aristocrats who think they know everything. He laughed. I never thought I knew everything. You absolutely did. All right, fine. Maybe I did. But you've thoroughly disabused me of that notion. Good. That's my job. They stood there, glasses in hand, and Adrienne realized she was happy, genuinely happy. Not the fierce satisfaction of victory, but the quiet contentment of purpose found and pursued. From enemies in a ballroom to partners in a revolution. Stranger things had happened, but not many. The moment stretched between them, comfortable but charged with something Adrienne couldn't quite name. Victor's office felt smaller suddenly, the space between them more noticeable. Before either could say more, rapid footsteps echoed in the hallway. Victor's secretary, Mr. Pemberton, appeared in the doorway, face flushed. Your Grace, Miss Hale, there's been an incident at the Thornmere mine. The wine glasses hit the desk simultaneously. What kind of incident? Victor demanded. Collapse. Section D. They're saying at least 20 men were working that shift. Pemberton's voice shook. Initial reports suggest structural failure, but get the carriage, Victor ordered, and send word to Dr. Carlyle. Tell him to bring his full emergency kit and meet us there. Adrienne was already grabbing her coat. How long ago? 30 minutes. They only just got word to us. The ride to Thornmere took 40 minutes that felt like hours. Neither Victor nor Adrienne spoke much. What was there to say? After everything they'd done, all the reforms implemented, all the inspections passed, this, a collapse. Men trapped underground, possibly dying while they raced through the darkness. When they arrived, the mine entrance was chaos. Torches and lanterns created pools of light in the darkness. Workers scrambled, some organizing rescue efforts, others standing frozen with shock. Women and children clustered nearby, faces white with terror. The mine foreman, a grizzled man named Henderson, met them at the entrance. Your Grace, Miss Hale. He looked haggard. Section D's main support gave way. We've got men trapped, but we can't tell how many, or if... He stopped, unable to finish. What caused it? Adrienne asked. Don't know yet. That section passed inspection 2 weeks ago. Everything was reinforced, up to code. All the new standards followed. Victor's jaw tightened. How long before we can start digging them out? We're already working on it. But the collapse blocked the main shaft. We're trying to clear it, but it's slow going. If we move wrong, we could trigger another collapse. Then we move carefully. Victor stripped off his coat, rolled up his sleeves. Show me what needs to be done. Henderson blinked. Your Grace, you can't... I absolutely can. My men are down there. Now show me where to dig. Adrienne grabbed Henderson's arm before he could protest further. Let him work. He needs to do something. She looked at the crowd of families. I'll handle them. Someone needs to keep them informed, keep them calm. Henderson nodded, leading Victor toward the rescue efforts. Adrienne turned to face the families, 20 or 30 people, maybe more. Wives, mothers, children. All looking at her with desperate hope, as if she had answers she didn't have. She took a breath and stepped forward. I'm Adrienne Hale, she said, projecting her voice to Carrie. I work with the Duke on safety reforms. I know you're scared. I know you want answers. Right now we're doing everything we can to reach your men. The Duke himself is part of the rescue effort. What caused it? A woman shouted. I thought the mines were safe now. You promised they were safe. The accusation hit like a physical blow. Adrienne forced herself to meet the woman's eyes. We don't know what caused it yet, but I promise you, we will find out. And if someone cut corners, if safety protocols were ignored, there will be consequences, real consequences. Promises don't bring back the dead, another woman said bitterly. No, they don't. Adrienne's voice cracked slightly. But they're all I have to give right now. That and my word that we won't stop until we get your men out. The hours that followed were the longest of Adrienne's life. She moved among the families, learning names, offering what comfort she could. A blanket for a shivering child. Water for a woman who couldn't stop crying. Just presence, because sometimes that was all anyone could offer. Meanwhile, at the mine entrance, the rescue continued. Victor worked alongside the miners, covered in dirt and sweat, hauling debris, reinforcing supports. Dr. Carlyle arrived and set up a makeshift medical station. Other workers from nearby operations showed up to help, drawn by word of the disaster. 3 hours in, they broke through. A shout went up from the entrance. We've got them! We've reached Section D! The families surged forward. Adrienne helped keep them back, creating space for the rescue workers to bring men out. The first survivor emerged supported by 2 workers, covered in dust, bleeding from a head wound, but alive. His wife screamed his name and rushed forward. Adrienne led her through. More men came out, some walking, some carried, all alive. 15, 16, 17. The count climbed. Each man reunited with family brought fresh tears of relief. 20 men had been in Section D when it collapsed. 19 came out alive. The 20th was brought out on a stretcher, Dr. Carlyle already working on him. Chest crushed by falling rock, barely breathing. His wife, the woman who'd accused Adrienne of breaking promises, collapsed beside the stretcher, sobbing. Adrienne watched Carlyle work, watched him fight for a life that was slipping away despite everything he tried. Watched the wife cling to her husband's hand like she could hold him to this world through sheer will. And when Carlyle finally stepped back, shaking his head, watched the wife's face crumple into a grief so profound it seemed to swallow all the light. Victor emerged from the mine, filthy and exhausted. He saw the stretcher, saw Carlyle's expression. His shoulders sagged. He crossed to the widow, knelt beside her in the dirt. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I'm so sorry." She looked at him with eyes that held an ocean of pain. "You said it would be safe. You both did. You promised." "I know, and I failed. I failed your husband. I failed you." His voice was raw. "There's nothing I can say that will make this better, but I swear to you I will find out what happened, and I will make sure it never happens again. That won't bring him back. No, nothing will." He stood slowly. "But you'll be cared for. You and your children. Compensation, housing, education, whatever you need, for as long as you need it. I don't want your money. I want my husband." "I know." And the grief in Victor's voice matched hers. "I know." By dawn, the families had been taken to temporary housing in Thornmere. The injured were with Dr. Carlyle. The dead miner's body had been covered and would be moved to the undertaker later. Victor and Adrienne stood at the mine entrance as the sun rose, both too exhausted to move. 19 survived, Victor said, but one didn't. That's on me. We don't know what caused it yet. Doesn't matter. They were my responsibility, my mine, my failure. He looked at her. How do we come back from this? We find out what happened. We fix it. We keep going. Just like that? No, not just like that. It'll be hard. People will doubt us again, question whether the reforms meant anything, but we keep going anyway. She touched his arm. Because the alternative is giving up, and we don't do that. Henderson approached, carrying something, a piece of timber partially burned. Found this in the collapsed section, he said grimly. It's one of the new support beams, installed during the reforms. Victor took it, examined it. The wood was charred on one end. Someone set a fire, Adrienne breathed. Deliberately weakened the supports. Sabotage, Henderson confirmed. And recent, too, maybe hours before the collapse. The implications crashed over them like a wave. This wasn't an accident, wasn't a failure of the reforms. Someone had actively tried to undermine them, to prove they didn't work, to destroy everything they'd built. Thornton's in prison, Victor said slowly. But he had allies, people who benefited from the old system, people who want the reforms to fail. We need to find out who. Adrienne's exhaustion vanished, replaced by cold fury. And we need to prove this was sabotage before people assume it was our fault. By midday, investigators were combing through Section D. They found more evidence. Oil-soaked rags near the burned support, tool marks where someone had partially sawed through a critical beam. It was clear. This had been deliberate. But who? The answer came from an unexpected source. One of the rescued miners, a man named Thomas, asked to speak with Victor and Adrienne privately. They met him in Henderson's office. Thomas was bandaged, shaking, but determined. I saw someone, he said. Night before the collapse. Didn't think much of it at the time, thought he was just a maintenance worker. But he was down in Section D with a lantern and tools. When he saw me, he made an excuse about checking ventilation and left quickly. Can you describe him? Adrienne asked. Dark hair, scar on his left cheek, spoke with a city accent. Thomas paused. And he had a pin on his coat. Thornton Industries. Victor and Adrienne exchanged looks. One of Thornton's men, Victor said. Still loyal even with him in prison. Or paid enough not to care about loyalty, Adrienne added. We need to find this man. They brought in Inspector Davies, showed him the evidence. Thomas gave a full description. Davies put out alerts to all constabularies in the region. The saboteur was caught trying to board a ship to the continent 2 days later. In his possession, a substantial sum of money and a letter. The letter was from someone named R. Blackwood. Blackwood, Adrienne said when Davies showed them. Thornton's lawyer. Not just representing him, apparently, Davies said grimly. Seems Blackwood's been coordinating with Thornton's remaining allies to undermine the reforms, make them look ineffective, drive public opinion back toward the old ways. Can you prove Blackwood ordered the sabotage? Victor asked. The saboteur is talking, giving us names, payment records, everything. Blackwood will be arrested by tonight. When Blackwood was taken into custody, he tried to claim legal privilege, attorney-client confidentiality. But the evidence was overwhelming, the saboteur's testimony, payment records, and more letters found in Blackwood's office showing an organized campaign to sabotage reform efforts across multiple industries. This wasn't just about Thornton anymore. It was bigger. A conspiracy of people who'd profited from exploitation and wanted to protect their interests. The second trial was faster than the first. Blackwood and 3 other conspirators were convicted of sabotage, conspiracy to commit murder, and racketeering, sentenced to hard labor. And this time, when the verdict came down, Adrienne felt no ambivalence, just grim satisfaction that justice had finally, truly been served. In the aftermath, something shifted in the public consciousness. The sabotage attempt had actually proven that the reforms worked. The mine had been safe until someone deliberately undermined it, and the speed with which Victor and Adrienne had investigated and found the culprits demonstrated real accountability. Newspapers that had mocked them now praised their diligence. Workers who'd been skeptical began to trust that the changes were genuine. Other industrialists, seeing the conspiracy exposed, quietly distanced themselves from the old guard and accelerated their own reforms. Within months, the regional government passed the Workers' Protection Act, comprehensive legislation based largely on the reforms Victor and Adrienne had implemented. It mandated safety standards, inspection protocols, compensation structures, and criminal penalties for violations. The day the act passed, Adrienne stood in the gallery of the legislative chamber, watching history being made. Beside her, Victor looked equally stunned. "We did this," she whispered. "You did this," he corrected. "I just stopped fighting you long enough to help." "We did it together." The ceremony afterward was formal, political, full of speeches from men taking credit for work they hadn't done. Adrienne barely listened. She was watching the workers in the gallery, men and women who'd lived through the dangerous conditions, who'd lost friends and family, who'd fought for change and finally won. One of them caught her eye, Ruth, from the Iron Gate factory fire. She was crying, but smiling too. She mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." Adrienne nodded back, throat too tight to speak. That evening, there was a celebration at the Ashford estate. Workers, reformers, politicians, journalists, everyone who'd played a part in the fight. The ballroom that had once been the site of Adrienne's defiant challenge now hosted a genuine party, full of life and laughter. Adrienne's father was there, beaming with pride. He pulled her into a hug that lasted a full minute. "I always knew you were meant for more than merchant accounting," he said. "I just didn't know it would be this." "Neither did I." "Are you happy, darling?" She considered the question. A year ago, she'd been furious and certain and alone. Now she was tired and uncertain and surrounded by people she'd fought beside. Her arms still ached sometimes from the stitches. She had nightmares about burning buildings. The memory of that widow's face haunted her. "Yes," she said. "I think I am." Victor found her later, on the terrace, looking out at the gardens beginning to bloom with spring. "Hiding from your own party?" he asked. "Just catching my breath. It's a lot." "It is." He joined her at the railing. "I've been thinking." Dangerous habit. "Hush. I'm trying to be serious." But he was smiling. "The reforms are implemented. The laws are passed. The immediate fight is won. And I think we should make this permanent. The partnership. Formalize it. Create an office specifically dedicated to oversight and continuous improvement, with you as director." Adrienne looked at him. "You're offering me a permanent position?" "I'm offering you power, real power, authority to inspect, to enforce, to demand accountability. Not just from me, but from any operation in the region. The legislation gives us that framework. We just need to build the institution." "Why me?" "Because you care. Because you're relentless. Because you've proven that you'll fight for what's right, even when it costs you everything. He paused. And because I trust you completely. The offer was staggering. Not just employment, but purpose. A platform to continue the work on a scale she'd never imagined. I'll need staff, she said slowly. Real authority. And you can't interfere when I find violations, even in your own operations. Agreed. And a budget. Proper resources. Done. And I want Ruth from Irongate on my team, and Marcus Webb. People who understand the work from the inside. Whatever you need. He held out his hand. Partners? For the long term? She took his hand, shook it firmly. Partners. But this time he didn't let go immediately. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, gentle and deliberate. Adrienne, he said quietly, I need to tell you something. Her heart kicked up. What? When you challenged me in that ballroom, I thought you were the most infuriating woman I'd ever met. Arrogant, self-righteous, completely out of line. Is there a point to this? The point is, you were also the bravest person in that room, the only one willing to speak truth to power. And I hated you for it because you were right. About me. About the mines. About everything I'd been telling myself was necessary. He met her eyes. You changed me, Adrienne, fundamentally. Made me question everything I thought I knew about duty and responsibility and what it means to have power. Victor, I'm not finished. Over these months working with you, fighting beside you, you've become more than a partner, more than a colleague. His voice softened. You've become the person I trust most in this world, the person I want beside me, not just in reform efforts, but in life. The world seemed to stop. Adrienne couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the sudden thundering of her heart. I'm not asking for an answer now, he continued. I know we've both been through too much, things are complicated, and you have every reason to tell me to keep things professional, but I needed you to know that you matter to me, more than reform, more than reputation, more than anything. She stared at him. This man who'd been her enemy, her ally, her friend, who'd gone into burning buildings and mine collapses, who'd changed everything about himself when challenged, who'd given her power instead of trying to control her. I thought I hated you, she said finally. For so long you represented everything wrong with the world. Power without accountability. Wealth without conscience. I was that person. You were. But you're not anymore. She stepped closer. And somewhere in all the fighting and reforming and nearly dying, I stopped seeing the Duke and started seeing Victor, the man who works beside his miners, who listens when challenged, who keeps his promises even when it costs him. Is that a good thing? It's a terrifying thing, because I don't trust easily, don't forgive easily, but somehow you've made me do both. His hand came up to her face, gentle. What are you saying? I'm saying, she took a breath. I'm saying I don't know what this is or where it's going. I'm saying that a year ago, if someone had told me I'd be standing here with you, feeling what I'm feeling, I'd have called them insane. But I'm also saying, I want to find out what this could be, what we could be. Even though people will talk, let them talk. I've spent a year being a scandal. Might as well make it worthwhile. He laughed, soft and warm, then kissed her. Gentle at first, tentative, giving her space to pull away. When she didn't, when she leaned into it instead, the kiss deepened. And standing there on the terrace with party sounds drifting from inside and spring blooming around them, Adrienne felt something she'd never expected to feel. Home. Not a place, but a person. A partnership that had started in fury and evolved into something neither of them had planned for. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victor pressed his forehead to hers. This is going to be complicated, he said. Everything worth doing is. People will say you're a social climber, that you used reform as a ladder to nobility. People will say a lot of things. We'll prove them wrong by doing the work. We will. He pulled back slightly. Though I should warn you, being with me comes with obligations, social events, political dinners, endless, tedious, aristocratic nonsense. And being with me comes with constant challenges to your authority, public arguments about policy, and a complete disregard for social hierarchy. Sounds perfect. They laughed, and it felt like release, like years of tension finally breaking into something lighter. The months that followed were busy. Adrienne built her oversight office from the ground up, hiring people she trusted, establishing protocols, making surprise inspections that kept industrialists honest. She found violations, including in some of Victor's operations, and enforced consequences without hesitation. Victor supported her completely, even when it embarrassed him. Especially when it embarrassed him. Their relationship developed slowly, carefully. Not hidden, but not announced either. They worked together during the day, argued about policy over dinner, found quiet moments in between. People noticed, people talked, but the work continued regardless. A year after the Workers' Protection Act passed, Adrienne stood at the Thornmere mine, the same mine where she'd watched a man die despite all their reforms. But now, there was a monument. A stone marker listing the names of all workers who died in industrial accidents. A promise carved in granite, never forgotten, never again. The widow who'd accused her of broken promises stood beside the monument with her children. She'd accepted the compensation, used it to open a small shop in Thornmere. She wasn't rich, but she was surviving, building a life from the wreckage. "Thank you," she said to Adrienne, "for not giving up, for making his death mean something." "I'm sorry it took his life to force the change," Adrienne replied. "Me too. But at least it did force it. That's more than most get." The memorial ceremony was simple. Workers, families, Victor speaking about responsibility and loss. Adrienne added her own words about the ongoing fight, the vigilance required to maintain progress. When it was over, she and Victor walked through the mine complex. It looked different now, cleaner, safer. Workers moved with less fear. Supervisors actually listened to safety concerns. "We should expand," Adrienne said, "beyond this region. Other areas need the same reforms." "Ambitious, so." "Always." "I love that about you." She glanced at him. They'd said the word carefully over the past months, testing it, meaning it more each time, but it still sent warmth through her chest. "I love that you let me be ambitious," she replied, "that you don't try to contain me. I learned that lesson the hard way. You can't be contained, only partnered with." They stopped at the mine entrance, looking down into the depths where men still worked, but now with proper equipment, proper supports, proper protections. "Do you ever regret it?" Victor asked. "That night at the ballroom, starting all of this?" Adrienne thought about everything that had happened. The exile, the fires, the deaths, the trials, the transformation of herself and him and the entire system. "No," she said. "I regret the cost, the people who died before we could save them, but I don't regret fighting. Some things are worth the risk." "Even when you didn't know how it would end?" "Especially then. If I'd known how hard it would be, I might have backed down. Sometimes courage is just not knowing better." He took her hand. "And sometimes it's knowing exactly how hard it will be and doing it anyway. That's the courage you have now." 6 months later, they married. Not in a grand ballroom with hundreds of aristocrats, but in a simple ceremony at the Thornmere Community Hall. Workers and their families attended, reformers and journalists. Adrienne's father gave her away with tears streaming down his face. Ruth was her witness. Marcus Webb stood up with Victor. The vows were traditional, but the promises underneath were unique. To challenge each other, to hold each other accountable, to build something better together than either could alone. When they kissed, the workers cheered. The celebration afterward was loud, chaotic, joyful, dancing and drinking, and the kind of laughter that comes from people who've survived something terrible together. Late in the evening, Adrienne found herself outside again, looking at stars. Victor joined her, 2 glasses of wine in hand. "Happy?" he asked. "Terrified," she admitted. "This is everything I never knew I wanted, and I keep waiting for it to fall apart." "It won't. We won't let it." "You can't promise that." "No. But I can promise to fight for it, same way we fought for everything else." She leaned into him, his arm coming around her shoulders. Inside, music played. Outside, the night was clear and cold and full of stars. "We really did it," she said softly. "Changed everything. from enemies to partners to this. From a ballroom challenge to a revolution. Not bad for a merchant's daughter. Or for a duke who thought he knew everything. I never thought I knew everything. You absolutely did. Maybe, but you fixed that. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the celebration through the windows. All those people whose lives had been touched by their fight, workers with safer conditions, families with compensation, children with futures that didn't involve dying young in dark tunnels. What now? Victor asked. We've won. The reforms are law. What's left to fight for? Adrian smiled. Everything. The work's never done. There are other industries, other regions, other fights. We've proven it can be done. Now, we prove it can last. Always fighting. Always. She turned to face him. Is that going to be a problem, Your Grace? Not even a little, my lady. He kissed her forehead. I wouldn't want you any other way. Inside, someone called for them. The first dance as husband and wife. They went in together, hand in hand, and danced in the center of the room, surrounded by people they'd fought for and with. And Adrian Ashford now, looked around at faces lit with joy and hope and thought about that night in the ballroom, when she'd been so certain of her righteous anger, so convinced she knew exactly who her enemy was. She'd been wrong about so many things, but she'd been right about the only thing that mattered, that speaking up, even when terrified, even when the whole world was against you, could change everything. The music played, the celebration continued, and somewhere in the north, minds operated safely. Families slept without fear, and the ghost of old injustices gave way to the possibility of something better. Not perfect, never perfect, but better. And that, Adrian had learned, was worth every battle.